Picture this. It's December 21st, 1954. For a small, fervent group of people huddled in a Chicago living room, tonight isn't just another winter night. It's the end of the world. A cataclysmic flood, they believe, is poised to wipe the planet clean. But they aren't gripped by fear. Instead, a quiet, almost serene anticipation fills the air. They are the chosen ones, the elect, destined for salvation. A magnificent flying saucer from a distant planet called Clarion is on its way, they are convinced, to rescue them from the impending doom. To prepare for this cosmic rendezvous, they've followed every instruction, no matter how extreme. They quit their jobs, severing ties with their earthly livelihoods. They gave away their life savings, divesting themselves of all material possessions. They cut off friends and family who, understandably, called them delusional, crazy, or worse. Every instruction came from their charismatic leader, a housewife named Dorothy Martin, who claimed to receive direct, urgent messages from extraterrestrial beings through automatic writing. So here they are, gathered in her modest living room, stripped of all metal as instructed, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and certainty. They wait for midnight, the precise moment of their promised salvation. But the clock ticks past 12. The early hours of December 22nd creep in, silent and uneventful. And nothing happens. No flood, no spaceship. The world is stubbornly, disappointingly still here. For most of us, this would be the shattering moment of truth. The instant the grand delusion collapses, forcing a painful confrontation with the crushing reality of a monumental mistake. But for this particular UFO cult, the failed prophecy didn't break their faith. In a twist that defies common sense, it actually made their conviction stronger, more unshakable. This is the astonishing story of how a powerful, often invisible psychological glitch can transform a simple belief into a dangerous, unbreakable obsession. It's a chilling narrative that reveals a hidden mechanism deep within our own minds, a vulnerability that, under the right circumstances, could subtly influence any one of us. This isn't just a bizarre historical footnote, it's a profound lesson in human psychology, a cautionary tale about the lengths we go to protect our beliefs, and a stark reminder of the unseen forces that shape our reality. To truly grasp the extraordinary events that unfolded in that Chicago living room, we must delve into the intricate workings of the human mind. In 1954, a brilliant and pioneering social psychologist named Leon Festinger was captivated by this small, obscure UFO group known to researchers as the Seekers. He and his dedicated team embarked on an audacious and unprecedented study. They decided to observe them not from a detached academic distance, but by going deep undercover, infiltrating the group and pretending to be genuine believers themselves. Their goal was to witness firsthand the psychological fallout when the prophecy inevitably failed. Festinger wasn't primarily interested in UFOs or alien contact. His true fascination lay with the human brain, its biases, and its remarkable capacity for self-deception. He was developing a groundbreaking theory, one that would revolutionize our understanding of human behavior, which he termed cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is that profound, often unsettling feeling of mental discomfort we experience when we simultaneously hold two contradictory ideas, beliefs, or values in our minds, or when our actions clash sharply with our deeply held convictions. Imagine a smoker who's acutely aware that smoking causes devastating diseases like cancer. The deeply ingrained belief, this habit is deadly and harmful, directly clashes with the ongoing action. I am lighting up another cigarette right now. That fundamental conflict generates a powerful internal tension, a psychological unease that demands resolution. To alleviate this uncomfortable tension, the mind is compelled to change something. One could, of course, quit smoking, thereby changing the action to align with the belief. Or far more commonly, one can rationalize the behavior. The smoker might tell themselves, "The science isn't entirely settled on this," or "It helps me cope with my immense stress," or "I'll definitely quit next year when things are less hectic." They invent a new, often elaborate story, a mental workaround to make the internal conflict disappear, to bring their thoughts and actions back into a state of harmony. For the seekers, the emotional and existential stakes were astronomically higher than a mere cigarette habit. These were not casual, fleeting believers. Many had made truly monumental, life-altering sacrifices, burning bridges and dismantling their entire previous existences. They had quit stable jobs, given away their homes and all their worldly possessions, and irrevocably severed ties with friends and family who couldn't comprehend their radical choices. They had invested everything, their financial security, their social connections, their emotional well-being, and their very identity into one singular, all-consuming belief. A spaceship is coming to save them. Festinger, with his keen psychological insight, understood that the greater the sacrifice, the more profound the potential for dissonance. When you have given up absolutely everything for a belief, the mere idea that you might have been wrong isn't just mildly embarrassing, it's psychologically devastating, an existential threat to your very sense of self. It implies not just that you were mistaken, but that you are a fool, a dupe, who has irrevocably ruined your own life for an illusion. Our minds, in their infinite capacity for self-preservation, will go to almost any length to avoid such a crushing, self-annihilating conclusion. As the night of December 21st wore on, the palpable tension in that living room became almost unbearable. The believers had even meticulously removed all metal objects from their clothing, just as instructed, in preparation for boarding the alien craft. Every agonizing minute that ticked by after midnight was more damning proof that their cherished belief was fundamentally flawed. This was the precise moment of maximum cognitive dissonance, a psychological pressure cooker on the verge of exploding. When the first rays of dawn broke on December 22nd, casting a harsh, unforgiving light into Dorothy Martin's living room, the seekers were faced with an agonizing binary choice. Option 1, accept the undeniable, glaringly obvious truth. The prophecy was a spectacular bust. There was no spaceship, no benevolent beings from Clarion, no apocalyptic flood. They were unequivocally wrong. This path meant confronting profound humiliation, facing financial ruin, and grappling with the wreckage of their former lives. It meant admitting a catastrophic, life-altering mistake, a public and private acknowledgement of their profound error. Option 2, find an alternative explanation. An explanation, however convoluted or fantastical, that would meticulously protect their core belief and perhaps, even more crucially, justify the incredible, irreversible sacrifices they had so willingly made. This was the path of psychological self-preservation, a desperate attempt to maintain their internal coherence and avoid the unbearable pain of admitting they had been utterly deluded. At precisely 4:45 a.m., as the group sat in stunned, anxious, and utterly silent despair, their leader, Dorothy Martin, suddenly received a new message. Her hand began to move, seemingly of its own accord, channeling a fresh communication from the Guardians. The message was deceptively simple, yet psychologically brilliant in its execution. It declared that this small, faithful group, by sitting there all night with such unwavering, powerful faith, had generated an immense amount of spiritual light. So potent was their collective belief, the message proclaimed that they had single-handedly saved the entire world. God, witnessing their profound devotion, had mercifully called off the flood because of them. It was a psychological masterstroke, a stroke of genius in the art of rationalization. Suddenly, their actions weren't a foolish mistake. They were transformed into an act of world-saving heroism. Their unwavering commitment wasn't naive or misguided. It was, in fact, the very force that had averted the apocalypse. This new revised belief didn't just alleviate their crushing anxiety, it transmuted them from the deluded victims of a failed prophecy into the unsung heroes of humanity. To resolve the excruciating dissonance between "I sacrificed everything for a spaceship" and "the spaceship never came," they adopted a third, even grander, more self-aggrandizing belief. My sacrifice was so powerful, so pure, that it literally saved the entire world. And this is where the story takes its most crucial and illuminating turn. Before the failed prophecy, the Seekers were notoriously secretive. They actively avoided the press, shunning publicity, and only engaged with individuals who were already sympathetic to their cause. But after their miraculous success, everything changed dramatically. Festinger and his team watched in utter amazement as the once private group began frantically calling local newspapers, radio stations, and anyone who would listen. They felt an urgent, almost desperate need to spread their new world-saving message. They had to get more followers, to share their incredible story with the masses. Why this sudden, dramatic shift? From reclusiveness to fervent proselytizing? Because if they could convince other people to believe their new, revised story, it would feel more real, more validated to them. Every new convert, every sympathetic ear, every nod of agreement was another piece of social proof, more external evidence that their elaborate rationalization was, in fact, the absolute truth. They weren't merely sharing good news, they were desperately trying to construct a new, shared social reality that would retroactively validate their extreme choices and erase the painful, humiliating memory of that failed prophecy. This is the precise moment a belief system turns outward, becoming loud, evangelical, and often aggressive in its pursuit of new adherents. It's the fundamental engine that drives proselytizing, and in more extreme isolated cases, it's the very engine that builds a dangerous, self-reinforcing cult. The need for external validation becomes paramount, a desperate attempt to shore up an internally fragile belief system. The compelling story of the Seekers provides an almost perfect textbook blueprint for how cognitive dissonance operates within a group dynamic. Thankfully, their particular narrative didn't culminate in violence but in tragic loss of life. But 40 years later, another UFO-centric group would embark on an eerily similar psychological journey, pushing the same principles to their darkest, most devastating possible conclusion. That group was Heaven's Gate. Founded in the early 1970s by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, known to their followers as Do and TI, respectively, Heaven's Gate fused esoteric Christian end-of-the-world prophecies with elements of science fiction and New Age mysticism. They preached that the Earth was on the verge of being recycled or wiped clean by a higher intelligence. Their followers were taught that their physical bodies were merely temporary containers or vehicles, disposable vessels they could shed to ascend to the next level, a literal physical heaven located somewhere in deep space. And to reach this celestial destination, they believed they had to board a waiting UFO. The parallels to the Seekers are almost uncanny, a chilling echo across the decades. Followers of Heaven's Gate also systematically abandoned their families, meticulously gave up all their personal possessions, and adopted an isolated, almost monastic lifestyle, living in communal, highly controlled environments. To demonstrate their ultimate commitment to shedding their earthly forms and transcending human sexuality, many of the male members even underwent voluntary castration. They had made the ultimate irreversible sacrifice, investing every fiber of their being into the group's ideology. But just like the Seekers, Heaven's Gate eventually encountered a moment of intense, unavoidable cognitive dissonance. In 1985, the group's co-founder, Bonnie Nettles, succumbed to cancer. This was an absolutely massive, devastating blow to their meticulously constructed theology. Their entire belief system revolved around the idea of physically ascending to the next level, leaving their bodies behind without the messy, inconvenient reality of natural death. Nettles's very human death from a very human disease flew directly in the face of their core promise, their central tenet of physical transcendence. For many, this should have been the definitive, undeniable proof that their entire worldview was fundamentally flawed, a tragic illusion. But they were too deeply entrenched, too heavily invested. Admitting they were wrong now would mean that Nettles had died for nothing, that their decades of sacrifice, their extreme lifestyle, their very identities had been utterly meaningless. The psychological cost of such an admission was simply too high to bear. So just like the Seekers before them, they rationalized. Marshall Applewhite, ever the charismatic leader, told his followers that Nettles hadn't truly died in the conventional sense. She had merely shed her vehicle early, he explained, and her consciousness had already successfully ascended to the next level. Her death, far from being a failure of their belief, was reinterpreted as a confirmation of it, a necessary step, a new phase of the divine plan. This single, powerful rationalization allowed the group to survive what should have been a fatal, belief-shattering blow to their entire system. It meticulously patched the gaping hole in their shared reality and allowed the agonizing cognitive dissonance to recede, replaced by a renewed, albeit twisted, sense of purpose. But this new adjusted belief that physical death was now the required path to board the spaceship set them on a far more dangerous, ultimately tragic course than the one the Seekers had walked. The stakes had been raised exponentially, and the path to salvation now explicitly involved the ultimate sacrifice. By the mid-1990s, the members of Heaven's Gate had been living in a state of extreme commitment, profound isolation, and unwavering belief for over 2 decades. Their entire identity, their social structure, their very sense of self was inextricably bound to the group and its teachings. Then, in 1995, astronomers made a significant discovery, the Hale-Bopp comet. For the vast majority of the world, it was a beautiful, awe-inspiring celestial event, a rare astronomical spectacle. For Heaven's Gate, however, it was the long-awaited, definitive sign they had been patiently waiting for. A persistent rumor began to circulate, eagerly amplified and endorsed by Applewhite, that a massive alien spacecraft was discreetly hiding in the comet's tail, obscured from conventional view. This, they fervently believed, was the very ship that would finally transport them to the next level, their ultimate destination. This new prophecy, tied to a tangible celestial event, was the final, definitive answer to decades of simmering cognitive dissonance. The years of patient waiting, the extreme sacrifices like castration, the profound isolation, Nettles's seemingly premature death, all of it would be gloriously justified by this one culminating event. But there was a crucial, chilling catch. Based on their newly refined theology, to board the ship, they had to shed their containers. They had to die. In late March 1997, in a sprawling mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, 39 members of Heaven's Gate, including Marshall Applewhite himself, did just that. Over a period of 3 days, in a meticulously planned and chillingly calm ritual, they ingested a lethal cocktail of barbiturates mixed with applesauce or pudding, washed down with vodka. They then lay down, covering their faces with purple shrouds to await their departure. They were discovered dressed in identical dark outfits with brand new Nike sneakers on their feet and small amounts of cash in their pockets, presumably for interplanetary tolls. They even left behind videotaped farewells, speaking calmly and rationally, explaining their profound happiness at graduating from the human condition and embarking on their cosmic journey. This wasn't simply the act of people who were brainwashed in the simplistic, often dismissive way we typically conceive of it. It was the tragic, yet chillingly logical culmination of a profound psychological process that began with a seemingly innocuous belief, was relentlessly strengthened by immense personal sacrifice, and was ultimately rendered unbreakable by the relentless pressure of cognitive dissonance. For them, turning back, admitting error, or abandoning their faith was psychologically impossible. To accept that there was no spaceship, no next level, would be to embrace a truth far more painful, far more existentially devastating than death itself. That their entire lives, their every choice, their every sacrifice, had been a monumental, meaningless waste. Their final collective act was the ultimate, most extreme way to resolve the unbearable dissonance, to make their cherished belief and their final, irreversible actions perfectly, tragically consistent. The same powerful psychological force that compelled the seekers to call the newspapers, when amplified over decades and intertwined with a more extreme, death-oriented theology, inexorably pushed the members of Heaven's Gate to end their own lives. It's incredibly easy, and perhaps comforting, to dismiss these stories as bizarre, fringe tales about eccentric groups on the extreme margins of society. You look at the UFOs, the matching sneakers, the strange rituals, and you instinctively think, that could never be me. I'm too rational, too smart. But the truly unsettling, profoundly uncomfortable part of these narratives is that the fundamental psychological force driving all of this has absolutely nothing to do with aliens, spaceships, or cosmic prophecies. It's about a universal, deeply ingrained feature of our shared human psychology: cognitive dissonance. We are all, every single one of us, wired to instinctively avoid the profound pain and discomfort of being wrong, especially when we have invested heavily emotionally, financially, socially, in a particular belief or course of action. You can observe milder, yet equally pervasive, versions of this psychological phenomenon playing out in everyday life all around us. Consider the person who spends a small fortune on a luxury car and then exclusively reads glowing reviews and dismisses any negative reports, desperately seeking to justify their extravagant purchase, ignoring any evidence of mechanical issues or poor performance. Think of the individual who stubbornly remains in a clearly unhealthy, even abusive relationship, not because it brings them joy or fulfillment, but because they've already invested years, perhaps even decades, into it. And leaving would feel like admitting those years were a complete loss, a wasted segment of their life. Or observe the fervent political supporter who, when presented with irrefutable evidence that their chosen candidate has been dishonest or corrupt, finds an ingenious way to spin that evidence, to rationalize it, to reinterpret it to perfectly fit their existing loyalty and unwavering support. The core psychological mechanism at play in all these scenarios is precisely the same. A deeply held belief is directly challenged by an inconvenient, often undeniable reality. This clash immediately creates intense mental tension, a state of psychological discomfort. To alleviate this discomfort, we are compelled to act. We either change our belief to align with the new reality, the harder, less common path, or far more frequently, we rationalize. We invent a new, often elaborate story. We selectively hunt for information that confirms what we already think, and we aggressively attack or dismiss anything that contradicts our established worldview. And in our modern, hyper-connected world, this process is operating on steroids, amplified to an unprecedented degree. Social media algorithms, for instance, are literally designed to show us content that aligns with our existing views and preferences. They meticulously construct echo chambers that effectively shield us from dissenting viewpoints, making it easier than ever to find proof or validation for any belief, no matter how outlandish or unfounded. These digital platforms can inadvertently create self-reinforcing bubbles that function remarkably like cults, driving us further apart, entrenching our biases, and making it increasingly difficult to agree on a shared, objective reality. The primary danger isn't that a significant portion of the population will suddenly join a UFO cult. The true insidious danger is that the very same mental glitch, the identical psychological vulnerability that led a few dozen people into a living room to patiently wait for a spaceship, is now operating on a global, pervasive scale. It's a fundamental vulnerability in our mental software, a cognitive blind spot that can be expertly exploited, not just by charismatic cult leaders, but by cunning politicians, manipulative marketers, and malicious online trolls. It isolates us within our own self-constructed realities, entrenches our biases, and systematically chips away at our collective ability to engage in constructive dialogue, find common ground, and solve complex problems together. Look, this fundamental tendency, this powerful drive to avoid the pain of being wrong, is an intrinsic, undeniable part of being human. We've all experienced it on some level, in some form. So I have a question for you, a challenge to reflect. Think deeply about a time in your own life when you believed something with all your heart. Perhaps it was a career path, a significant relationship, a deeply held political conviction, or a cherished personal idea. And then you were confronted with undeniable evidence, a harsh reality that it might be fundamentally flawed or even completely wrong. How did you react in that moment of profound cognitive dissonance? Did you double down, defending your belief even more fiercely, rationalizing away the contradictory evidence? Or did you manage to shift your perspective, however painful that might have been? Share your story, your personal experience with this powerful psychological quirk in the comments below. It's a powerful way to illuminate how this universal mental mechanism shows up in our own individual lives and how we navigate its often unseen influence. From a quiet, unassuming living room in 1950s Chicago to a tragic, meticulously staged scene in a sprawling California mansion, the winding path of a UFO cult is, at its core, a chillingly precise map of the human mind under extreme pressure. When you strip away the sensational headlines, the alien narratives, and the bizarre details, the stories of the Seekers and Heaven's Gate aren't truly about extraterrestrials at all. They are profound, unsettling parables about our innate, powerful human need to believe in something larger than ourselves, to find meaning and purpose, and the extraordinary, often terrifying lengths our minds will go to protect those cherished beliefs once we have sacrificed for them. They starkly illustrate how the simple, relatable discomfort of being wrong can spiral into a fanaticism that defies all logic, all reason, and sometimes, tragically, ends in self-destruction. The individuals who joined these groups weren't inherently stupid or weak or clinically insane. They were, in essence, people just like us, searching for meaning, for belonging, for a sense of purpose in a vast, often confusing world. And that forces us to confront an uncomfortable yet vital question. How absolutely sure are we that our own deepest, most cherished beliefs are built on solid, unshakable ground? And what truly would we do if that ground suddenly, violently began to shake beneath our feet? The answer to that question might reveal more about ourselves than we are comfortable admitting.